This is the Flyerdelphia Podcast, presented by SportsTalkPhilly.com, with Kevin Durso, Rob Riches, and Dan Heaning. Hello, Flyers fans, and welcome into another episode of the Flyerdelphia Podcast, part of SportsTalkPhilly.com. I'm your host, Kevin Durso, joined once again by Rob Riches and Dan Heaning. And this episode of the Flyerdelphia Podcast is being released on the date of the season opener for the Flyers, a meeting with the San Jose Sharks set for Wednesday night at 10:30. The Flyers will also play the Los Angeles Kings and the Anaheim Ducks later this week, as well on Thursday and Saturday. So we're going to go over everything that brought us up to this point and the start of the season, so the rest of the preseason. We're going to look at the final roster, the projected lineup for Wednesday's game. We'll also look at how the Flyers stack up against their division. We'll look specifically at the 3 games this week and the Flyers' strengths and weaknesses entering the season. And then lastly, we'll also be making some season predictions for the Flyers and just giving our thoughts on some of the burning questions that a lot of people have been discussing leading up to this point. But before we do anything else, we do want to start off by taking a moment here at the start of the show to remember legendary Hall of Fame broadcaster Dave Strader. Locally, he was the voice of the Detroit Red Wings, Phoenix Coyotes, Florida Panthers, and Dallas Stars. But he was known nationally for calling games on ESPN, ABC, Fox, and eventually the NBC networks. Strades passed away on Sunday morning at age 62 following a battle with cancer. And Rob, Dan, and I specifically want to pass along our condolences to his family and his colleagues around the hockey world. We had a piece on the site on Monday, a very well done piece by our staff writer, Jeff Quake, but we did want to mention this on the podcast here as well, and I want to get your guys' thoughts on it, because I remember him from the ESPN time as well, and things like that. He would call playoff games constantly over the years, and I loved his combination of excitement for the game there was an eloquence to his voice, and he just really had he was really the total package for a broadcaster. What do you guys remember about Dave Strader?
I very much enjoyed Strader's body of work. He was definitely one of my favorites of the hockey commentators out there. And, I think that when Dallas brought him on a couple of years ago, I think for the 2015-16 season, that was definitely a great move on their part. And, I think he definitely helped get that region a lot more excited about the game. And, I very, the one thing about Strader that I'll remember is when he missed the part of the last season, or a big chunk of it. I think he came back. It was in February for a home game, and after the game, Dallas's players actually crowded up at center ice, and they raised their sticks up to the broadcast booth and kind of saluted him. I remember watching that. I thought that was an excellent moment. It was more than a fitting tribute for him, and I think actually. A picture of that has been blown up and put in the players' tunnel at the Stars Arena at the American Airlines Center, and so when they walk out and they take the ice, they walk by that, and I think that's definitely a fitting tribute. I think that the game of hockey was a lot better with Strader around, and he'll absolutely be missed.
Yeah, every time there was a national game on NBC, Dave Strader was the guy I always rooted for. To be calling the game. Nothing against any of the other talent there. It was just the way he would call a game. It never seemed over the top. It never seemed forced. It's just there was a poetry to his voice. There was a manner of which he would work in his color guys. He was a great broadcaster, and I always loved listening to him. And his work with Brian Engblom on ESPN, his work with Darren Pang. I was just listening to the Hockey News podcast, and if you want to have any kind of scope of the impact that Dave Strader left behind, listen to their interview with it wasn't the Hockey News. It was SN's. It was Hockey Central at noon. They were interviewing Darren Pang, and the man was just in tears the entire time. So if you want to have a scope of, Darren Dave Strader's impact, listen to Darren Pang's interview on the Hockey Central at Noon podcast, because that man loved Darren Strader, and it was a bad day for hockey on Sunday.
Yeah, it was, and it was kind of mid to late morning when the news broke about that, and I'm going to go back to, I remember one of the Flyers-Penguins games a few years back. I believe it was, might have been the 14-15 season if I'm not mistaken, but it was a game that Strader was calling with Brian Engblom on NBC. It was a Tuesday night, or I think it was a Tuesday night game because it wasn't NBC's normal Wednesday team. So I think it was a Tuesday, and it was in January too. So there was really it wasn't a big deal. The game wasn't, it's Flyers Penguins and it's a big rivalry, but there really wasn't any huge gravitas to the game at all. But the game was one of the most exciting that I can remember witnessing, and I went back and rewatched it maybe a few days later or saw highlights of it, and the way that Dave Strader called the overtime in that game, it was a game that went to overtime. The Flyers won 3-2, and Claude Giroux scored the game-winning goal on that. It was a weird play. I believe it was Voracek who had a one-timer that went, actually, Thomas Greiss was in goal for Pittsburgh, and it went into his jersey and fell out the back, and nobody could find it. And then Giroux buried the rebound that sat in the crease. But the way that Strader's voice sounded, I thought it was Dave Strader at his finest. And so it was really cool and something that I'll remember him for. I believe if you go on, and we've talked about these before when we were doing some of our earlier shows this year where we were talking about players of the 90s and things like that, and great Flyers games of the 90s. Go on YouTube and look up some of the national games from right around anywhere, not between, I want to say 97. 97 is a little early, but go in the 2002 to 2004 range, and you'll probably find highlights of a game Dave Strader called. Maybe it's in the playoffs, maybe it's just short of the playoffs, but he did a lot of games in the area at that time, and they're just tremendous. It's excellent. So I think it was necessary for us as big hockey guys in general, more than just doing it for this with the Flyerdelphia podcast and talking about Flyers hockey. We're all big hockey guys, and we'll pretty much watch any game that we can get our hands on. So you come to know a lot of these national broadcasters and feel like it's personal because you watch them and they're the ones telling the story for you. And Dave Strader did it as well as anybody. So we wanted to make a mention of that and send along our best to his family and to, like we said, his colleagues around the hockey world who are certainly suffering a big loss. It was, I don't want to say it was unexpected completely because we all knew he was battling and it was a big, tough deal for him. But, he was a fighter and he took it to the end. So we just want to say thank you, Dave Strader, for all the memories of games on national TV for us and some of the local highlights we got to see. That I think Rob mentioned that Dallas game. It was against Tampa Bay last year where he finally got back in the booth and they won in overtime and they saluted him and it was great. So thank you, Dave Strader, for lending your voice to the hockey world. So on to the Flyers season opener. And first things first, the Flyers had to finish off the preseason and announce a final roster. So on Sunday, following their 5-2 loss to the New York Islanders, the Flyers cut down the roster to 24 players at the time. It was expected going in, it was going to just be, here come the last two cuts. Only one came on Sunday night. Oscar Lindblom goes to the Lehigh Valley Phantoms. The final cut waited because Shane Gostisbehere suffered an injury in the third period of Sunday's game. So that forced the Flyers to kind of evaluate the situation, hold everything, and go into Monday with that last cut still unknown. On Monday, the Flyers placed Matt Reed on waivers as their final cut, at least for now. So guys, with all of these moves happening, what do you think of all these roster moves and the players that make up the Flyers' final roster? Dan, I'll start with you.
Well, the move to send Lindblom down might come as a surprise, but if you go back and you watch that Boston Bruins preseason game, the one in Boston, Lindblom had a lot of opportunities on the power play. That was a slog of a game. There were a lot of power play opportunities, and it didn't look very good until they moved Filppula into that position and they took Lindblom off. So the writing was kind of on the wall after that point. It is a shame because the kid did play very well during the preseason. I know somebody threw around Twitter that he led the team in Corsi, but Corsi in the preseason is kind of I don't want to call it a misnomer, but it it might be a little misleading just because it depends on the quality of competition and all that. And then and Matt Reed, I said in the last show or 2 shows ago that Matt Reed was the low-hanging fruit on the roster. So all you had to do was kind of beat him out and you'd make the team. Scott Lawton and Taylor Lear did that. And like you alluded to, Kevin, he might be back on the roster. I don't know why you would want to roll with 14 guys, but it is what it is with Matt Reed. He doesn't produce. He's just a defensive type of guy, and if you can get offense out of a guy like Scott Lawton, who could potentially play on the penalty kill, then Matt Reed's got to go somewhere.
Rob, what about your thoughts on the Lindblom and Reed cuts?
I think there was a lot of surprise when it was seen that Lindblom was sent down. Just obviously, he didn't have the strongest preseason out there. Like Dan said, he had plenty of his chances out there. He had plenty of opportunities, and I think a lot of it is he's just still trying to find his legs. And really, I expected him to make the roster for opening night, but I don't hate the move sending him to the Phantoms, just kind of letting him find his legs out there, letting him grow his game a little bit. I have no issue with that. But the way I look at the Reed cut, that's something I think that they can just send him down, and because they send 8 defensemen out to California because they still have to figure out the Gostisbehere situation. So I think that once they kind of get a better handle of how Gostisbehere is going to progress, and it's looking like it's nothing serious with him. It's a day-to-day kind of thing. He should be ready to go at least by Thursday's game. But I think that once they get a better handle on that they'll send one of the other defensemen down and bring Reed back up. So I think I don't make too much of this Reed demotion to the Phantoms. I think that personally I'm okay with it. We mentioned before, it's Matt Reed is who he is. We already know what we're getting out of Matt Reed, and so I think that that's something where they'll probably bring him back up and find a spot for him, and then send. I think I would say Sanheim. That's just my early guess. Travis Sanheim back down and kind of replace, but we'll see how that one goes. I don't think that they want to hang around with 8 defensemen for longer than they really want to, but it's something that I think is what they're ultimately going to go with. It's either Sam Morin or Travis Sanheim, and then Reed comes back up.
Yeah, I mean, here's what I'll say about Matt Reed, because I really don't have too many thoughts on this. I do expect him to be back up with the Flyers in the short term. That being said, as I'll call it, it was a little surprising to see him placed on waivers because I didn't expect the Flyers to do it. That was kind of the thing with the move for me. Because at some point in time during the preseason, as I was looking at the way that the players on the team were progressing to that point during the preseason, now I'm going to go probably about maybe the second Ranger game last week. So I think it would be a week ago Tuesday. And I looked at that and I just remember sitting there saying, what has Matt Reed shown that makes him any better than anybody else that's in this camp right now? He's almost expendable at this point. So I was thinking it, but in the back of your mind, you sit there and you go, veteran presence, guy with a decent-sized contract. We know what decent-sized contracts usually mean. You're stuck with them for better or worse. And look, I'm not going to say anything that's anything crazy. Because I should have mentioned this off at the top too. I have all 3 of our rosters and lineups from a few weeks back from the start of the training camp that we put together. So I'll be tapping into that kind of every now and then as we go, just kind of see where we were, how close we were on all accounts. All 3 of us had Matt Reed as an extra forward in some capacity. So that's not a surprise, but we all figured they're going to have to carry 14 because how do you go through... You can't waive everybody, you can't just rid yourself of the players that seem to be dead weight, even if Matt Reed is a bit of dead weight at this point. So we all had Reed in the same position. The fact that he went on waivers says a lot, but I think it's very short term. Lindblom, on the other hand, I think we all had lofty expectations for Lindblom, and yes, all 3 of us had him on our predicted rosters from a few weeks back. But that being said, I agree with Ron Hextall that time in the minors doesn't hurt anybody. I think it would have been a more disappointing move if the writing wasn't on the wall. If Lindblom had played on Thursday and then Sunday and then gets told you didn't make it because you played in these games and we still didn't think you were good enough, Now I get the sense, I understand the frustration even more. I guess there's still some frustration to be had in the fact that they essentially gave up on Lindblom's chance to make the team before the preseason was over, because playing him in one game out of the last 4 kind of says, we know where you're going and we're just keeping you around here kind of for what, But I think that's more on Taylor Lear than it is on Lindblom, because I think Taylor Lear made the push the Flyers were looking for. Lindblom's lack of experience in North America comes into play. So with all that in mind, I don't see this as a full season move. I think Lindblom's time is still this season, just not in October. And the flexibility that they had with him, the fact they could move him to the Phantoms without placing him on waivers, was probably a primary reason for the decision. Now, let's go back into the defensive situation here, and we're going to kind of bounce all over the place with some of these roster moves, because there were some that were announced on Sunday, some that are still up in the air. Robert Hägg was told he's in, and said as much to the media after Sunday's game. Sam Morin and Travis Sanheim are in California with the Flyers right now, and some combination of the three is probably going to play on Wednesday night. But the question is which combination, and then after that, once Shane Gostisbehere is ready to go, once the Flyers bring Matt Reed back into the picture, assuming that's where they're going to go with this, because Ron Hextall did say on Tuesday he doesn't want to keep 8 defensemen for long. So with Hägg being known as an in, and I do want to get your guys' thoughts on Hägg being on the roster for good, then I want to kind of go, and Rob, you touched on it already, but I want to go off of who you think is going to last out of the other 2 as well. So, Rob, why don't you kind of finish off your thought, because you kind of already touched on Morin, Sanheim a little bit, but talk about Robert Hägg a little bit, and why you have Sam Morin sticking around longer as well.
In a perfect world, I mean, you'd have all 3 of them. You'd have Hägg, Morin, and Sanheim. Obviously, that's something I'd be more than okay with, and I'm sure there's a lot of fans out there who could say the same. But I think it's kind of funny when you look at Sanheim. I mean, there were points earlier on in camp where it looked like he was struggling a little bit. It looked like he couldn't really keep up, and he absolutely busted his hind. Basically, you were looking at a completely different Sanheim by the end of training camp. I mean, he was all over the place. He was making plays. He was lighting the lamp, and it's something where I think that Sam Morin. I mean, he's also you can't deny. I mean, he's had a heck of a camp in his own respect. So I think it's something where when it comes down to it, they'll end up going with Morin just because he's been looking comfortable out there. It's something where, he had that call up at the end of the season as well last year. He's got that, I don't want to say it's a seniority kind of thing because he's been around just a year longer than Sanheim. But I think when it comes down to it, it's something where, it looks like he's a little more comfortable out there. And I have Sanheim as the guy who he can go to the Phantoms. He won't stay there for long. Once somebody gets hurt, he comes right back up. So that's something where, I think that's what they're ultimately going to go with, and we'll see how that one goes. And
what about your thoughts on Robert Hägg as well?
Hägg, I kind of had him pegged, kind of as, from the start as the guy who's going to, the young guy who's going to make the cut, on the roster. I mean, it's something where, his game's very refined. I like where he's at, and, that's something where, I'm looking forward to seeing what he could do.
Yeah, assuming that you're right that Sanheim's the one to go down, then Rob, you would have had it nailed defensively. You had the combination of Morin and Hägg in the lineup on opening night when we kind of did a projection, so you had it right out of all of us. So, Dan, what about your thoughts on the 3? Yeah, well, that's a good point. But Dan, what about your thoughts on the 3 defensemen that are still left here, and which one stays, which one stays, which one goes, and Robert Hägg being a lock at this point?
Well, Robert Hägg, I said it on the last show, where if you can tell a defenseman is doing his job if you don't notice him, and he was pretty much like that. If you weren't paying specific attention to Robert Hägg, you would have sworn it was just a veteran presence right there, right next to Gostisbehere wherever he was playing. So Robert Hägg showed a tremendous amount of poise. He has that blend between the talent of Sanheim and Morin, where he can play physically, he can move the puck up ice. Seems like a very natural partner to Shane Gostisbehere. I'm going to keep saying this over and over and over until I'm proven wrong. So it doesn't surprise me at all that Robert Hägg was the first one of the 3 to officially make the team. In terms of Moran and Sanheim, I agree with Rob at this point. Sanheim made a couple mistakes. Yeah, he had 3 goals, but one of them probably shouldn't have went in because Tuukka Rask probably should have stopped it and would have stopped it during the regular season. Sanheim played very well, and he deserves a spot on the team, but there's only so many spots to go around. And he has the skill set where he can be a plug-and-play type player when he gets called up. He's an offensive defenseman, sort of like how Shane Gostisbehere sparked the team a couple seasons ago, because he's an offensive guy. You can just let him go, let him do his thing. You can kind of do that with Travis Sanheim. For Sam Moran, you kind of want him to be back there and be comfortable, get him the games, get him the reps, which is curious why he might not play in favor of Brandon Manning, which Brandon Manning's a 7th defenseman. That's all he's ever going to be. Sorry, man, dog, I'm talking crap. But he shouldn't be playing over Sam Moran. Like, I'm not going to get too worried over the opening night roster because Sam Moran will play at some point. But I was impressed by Sam Moran. He made that one move in that 5-1 preseason game against Boston that I was like, wait, who made that pass? Sam Moran? What? So, no, Sam Moran deserved this spot, and absolutely, Rob hit the nail on the head. Moran and Hag, they're definitely ready to play in the NHL right now.
Yeah, and I had the same kind of reaction to that move that Moran made in that preseason game. I couldn't believe it, and shorthanded no less. You know, who is this guy who is supposed to not have the offensive skill set but makes a move like that shorthanded? I'll start with my thoughts on Robert Hagg because I already started to take the L on this one last week because I had him not making the team when we did projections a couple weeks ago, and I admitted last week that I was probably going to be wrong on that one then. And I'm glad to be wrong. You know, he was stable. I thought that's a good word for it. He was stable. He wasn't noticeable, which for a defenseman is a good thing. And I think Travis Sanheim's mistakes were noticeable at times, and that shows he could still use some work and some seasoning in the minors. You know, he's here for right now, and I understand why, but to me, I thought Sam Moran had the best preseason of the rookie defenseman, but Hagg certainly did enough to make the team, no question. I look at Sam Moran and I go, this guy should be playing every night. No question about it. Now, and that's another story because the opening night lineup is going to be interesting. There's no question about it. But, you know, I thought there was nothing more that Sam Moran could do to prove that he's ready for the NHL at this point. He's kind of that, you know, I'll piggyback off of what you guys said with the seniority point. He's the one who's been around technically the longest. He and, you know, Moran and Hagg are the same draft year. Moran's the first round pick. Hagg was the 3rd round pick, so it's you know, so there's a couple things that kind of come into play, and it makes them a little different. But relatively, you know, they're in the same kind of situation, so to speak. They've played professionally for multiple seasons. They're the ones who should be making the leap. When it comes to Sanheim, this was my thought going into assuming that the Gostisbehere injury doesn't happen at all. And Gostisbehere has said, by the way, since he's good to go for Wednesday. So he thinks he's good to go. We'll see if the Flyers decide to let him play or not. But my thought was, let's assume that Gostisbehere was fine from the beginning and the Flyers were able to make the cut the way that they wanted to on Sunday. If it was Sanheim, I get it. And, you know, I know that he probably played well enough that if you had a spot for him, that's great. My thought with Sanheim, and I'm actually going to go back to some of the things with Lindblom as well, because it's in 2 cases here. You knew that there were 2 available defensive spots. So you have 3 defensemen going after 2 spots, and as much as you'd like to keep all 3 in some capacity, there just wasn't an extra spot that gives you regular playing time. So Sanheim gets the regular playing time in the AHL until there's an injury. He's close. We all know he's close. He's probably in the same situation as Lindblom, where you just need an injury to open up a spot. And then he'll be here, and there'll probably be no turning back once he plays 5-10 games in a row, if that's what it takes. But when the time comes, and the Flyers don't need an 8th defenseman anymore, I think Sanheim is the one to go down. I felt the same way about Lindblom, because basically the way that I reviewed it is, and to kind of segue over to some of the other forwards that made the team, I thought that Taylor Lear took Lindblom's spot that we were giving. You know, we were all putting Oscar Lindblom on our projected rosters going into the training camp, and what was Taylor Lear? He was kind of a dark horse, but nothing more, and you kind of almost dismissed the fact that he had a shot. He came in and he earned it. simple as that. I'm happy for him, actually, because I feel like he's a hard-working player. I feel like he's going to be able to do some good things. I certainly like the idea of him playing with Lawton, who also made the team. And I'm not surprised that Lawton made it, because the level of play that he showed in the last couple games is exactly what you want to see out of him. He really proved himself, especially after the Flyers put a lot of faith in him on the new contract, protecting him from the expansion draft. Now he makes the team. You know, that's pretty much the way it is. How do you guys view the two fourth-line guys that made the cut? Dan, you can go first.
Well, I'm very much impressed by the way Scott Lawton performed. He seemed to have built quite the rapport with Michael Raffl. We had a couple of 21-12 plays in the last few preseason games. A lot of rush goals, and I like to see that. Every time they have a goal, they should play 21-12 over the speakers at Wells Fargo Center.
It's an improvement over what they've got now.
That would be awesome.
Yeah, it would. That's the only way they should go about it. But yes, it would definitely be an improvement. The last time they played rush at the Wells Fargo Center was probably during the R40 tour. But no, he's played well. Tyler Lear completely caught me off guard. Like, I thought he had a chance, but not that great of a chance. He had like a couple goals in the preseason game against the Islanders. I believe it was one of the split squad games, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah, it was.
So I like them together. I think Scott Lawton and Michael Raffl at one point will play with Travis Konechny, because I don't feel like Konechny playing with Filppula or Weiss potentially will give him a lot of options in terms of making plays, and I feel like him playing with Lawton Raffl could. So I feel like towards, maybe a month or two in, that this Lawton Raffl combination could potentially be the tertiary scoring that the Flyers desperately need.
Rob, what about you?
Yeah, I was very much impressed by what Lawton had to provide throughout training camp. I mean, he pretty much knew it was all or nothing for him at this juncture, and it's something where, he really just kind of came up and, he was, working real hard. I'm also glad to see Taylor Lear make the jump, because I felt like Lear was kind of underrated as far as Flyers prospects were concerned. He was somebody who could put up good numbers, but he's not exactly somebody who, people can be excited about. And when you have that the 2012 draft class that featured the likes of Anthony Stolarz and Goss Despair, it's something where it's easy to kind of fall, in behind that, as far as hype is concerned. And, so that's something where, he absolutely worked his tail off. And, I'm really impressed with what he had to offer. And I'm kind of looking forward to seeing where he can go from here. He's had a few call-ups over the past few years, and he's definitely earned those. And I'm glad to see that he's able to get that roster spot. He's somebody who really worked incredibly hard. You always like to see that get rewarded. And honestly, the rapport that Dan touched on with between Lawton and Raffl connecting for a few goals in the preseason, can we call that the priests of the temples of Syrinx line?
Got to get the Rush reference in.
That's what I'm going with that. I'm going with that.
What can this strange combination be?
Yeah, right? Something like that. One thing, and I don't know if you guys have seen this yet, but one thing I did want to say that I thought was really cool. The Flyers put out a video on Tuesday night that was kind of a behind-the-scenes look at training camp, and one of the last moments of that clip was Taylor Lear calling his family to tell him that he made the team. That's just so awesome to see. And he was really excited about it. And then we have one player left that we haven't talked about yet. Now, and how can we have not talked about him yet? Because we're 13 episodes in, I think something like that. We've done quite a few at this point. But our first show was on the day of the NHL draft, and we said then that it was probably going to be Nolan Patrick with the second overall pick. And I remember saying the words, "Get ready to see a lot of number 19 jerseys in the stands at Wells Fargo Center." And here we are. So this isn't a shock at all. He didn't light up the score sheet by any means, but he was consistent, and he played a strong two-way game, and he looks ready. What do you guys think?
Yeah, his game's been looking incredible over training camp. I've been pretty impressed with him. And, a lot of people are saying that there's a little bit of a competition, a little bit of buzz between the respective training camps that he was churning out between him and Nico Hischier up in New Jersey. And, Hischier had a couple of flashy plays. He was looking pretty decent for the most part. I think he ended up scoring more. So obviously that's something where people are like, okay, well, this guy's more ready off the jump. But, if that's something, that's Devils fan thing to do, is celebrate a guy who's looking better in the preseason. That's something where the big picture, I definitely like what Nolan Patrick can provide, and I'm actually looking forward to seeing what he can do going forward now that there are points on the line, and every game counts for points in the standings.
I've never heard such enthusiasm for a preseason fight than I did in that 5-1 Boston Bruins game. It was
welcome aboard, Nolan.
Yeah, absolutely. I think he was named mayor after the end of that game, because they were chanting his name. Absolutely, just the crowd went nuts. And I said it in that first show. I'm going to keep saying it until I'm wrong. The Philadelphia Flyers fans are absolutely going to love Nolan Patrick, because he has that skill set that Flyers fans love. That lunch pail, I'm going to break your face open and score a goal, all in the same shift. He embodied that in that shift. He didn't score a goal, but I believe he had an assist in that game. So he was a goal away from having a Gordie Howe hat trick. He's that type of player. He's that type of player that's going to go in the corners. He's going to do a no-look pass to Wayne Simmons from the corners. He's got the skill. He's got the two-way play, as Kevin mentioned, and he's got that physical presence. He's not afraid to drop the gloves against David Krejci. He's essentially he was, like I said in the first show, he's born to be a Flyer, and there was never any doubt that he was going to be on this team in my eyes.
I think that going back to that fight, one of my favorite parts about that was the picture that kind of went viral. I know it was on Reddit and it kind of went all over, but it was the picture just after the fight of Giroux going over to kind of give him the congratulations, the tap on the shin pads. He's got the biggest smile on his face. I don't think Giroux smiles like that unless he's got grilled cheese in front of him before a game. But that was a pretty cool shot, seeing that go around. It's almost like he was a proud dad.
He got cheered after the fight, and then once he got released from the penalty box, he got another round of cheers. That's how much this guy is going to be loved by his teammates and the fans.
I was going to say, Dan, you mean Flyers fans don't love him already? I think they have since draft night. This is not surprising. One thing I want to mention about Nolan Patrick is that I really like, from top to bottom in this organization, Ron Hextall, Dave Haxtell, the way the coaches handled him in training camp by not wavering with the line he was on. It's always been from day one, Nolan Patrick with Jordan Weal and Wayne Simmons. I can't wait to see this line in the regular season. I think this line's going to be pretty good for the Flyers. I think there's a lot to like about that. I think Simmons and Weal kind of are perfectly counterbalancing what Nolan Patrick brings. And I'm with you guys. You don't want Nolan Patrick tearing his hands up in fights all the time, but it's initiation in Philadelphia. You got to drop the gloves at some point in time just to kind of win over everybody. If you haven't already, I mean, they were chanting his name at the rookie game too when he stepped on the ice. So that certainly wins them over, but I can't wait to see him on that line. And, so he didn't score a goal yet in the preseason, and Nico Hischier went out there and scored a lot of them. He got asked about that. Nolan Patrick got asked about that and said, "That's not my game. I'm not that kind of a player. I'm more balanced in that way. I'm not going to be Patrick Laine, who scores a ton of goals. It's just not my style." But he also went on to say that in terms of scoring, once the first goal comes, it should come a lot easier, because of the fact that he even said he usually starts a little slower with goal scoring every year, and once he gets one, it usually starts to come a little bit more and more. And it's not like he didn't have scoring chances or come very close. Rookie game, he hit a post in overtime. There was a play he made against, I think it was also in the Boston game, he hit the post in that one, and you're like, that's unbelievable, what he's able to do. So I think there's the sky's the limit with this kid, and I think we knew from day one we were going to be here waiting for number 19 to take the ice on opening night, no question. Speaking of number 19, by the way, for Flyers fans watching Wednesday night's game, pending on how many rookies are actually in the lineup, obviously the defensive situation is another story, but the amount of new numbers you're going to have to get familiar with, as was put out on Tuesday. Robert Haig's going to wear number 8, and Sam Moran's wearing number 5, Travis Sanheim's wearing number 6, and Taylor Lear is wearing number 20. So Lots of number changes. Nolan Patrick went from, obviously, he wore 64 through the entire camp and took number 19, which is a familiar number for him. I kind of laughed because after Sunday's game, right before he found out he actually made the team, I guess, when he talked to the media, he played coy about it and said, I have a number in mind. Like we didn't know this was coming. So before we move on to our next subject, any final thoughts on the roster, the lineup, all of that from you guys?
It's kind of funny because every time I have this weird condition where anytime I see a Flyers number on the ice, I'm automatically assuming it's a Flyer from another period of time, another era. Like, for example, when Voracek first came here in 2011, every time I saw the 93, I just kept assuming it was Peter Nedved. But, I'm going to see Sam Moran's 5 out there. I'm just going to be thinking of Kim Janssen. I'm going to see Sanheim 6. I'm going to be thinking Chris Therien. So it's going to get weird. It's going to be a little bit of an adjustment, but I'm already looking forward to it.
There was a fair amount of fear and loathing with a lot of these lineup announcements. And the one thing I want Flyers fans to remember is Jordan Wheel had a really good training camp last year. He really probably should have made the team last year, and he didn't. And what did he do? He went to the AHL. He was over a point per game player, slightly over a point per game player in the AHL. Waited his turn and when he had his chance, he made sure the Flyers didn't send him down again. And that's exactly what Oscar Lindblom is going to have to do this season. And I expect that to happen, but you just got to wait your turn.
Simple as that. I completely agree. So with the Flyers roster set, we turn our attention to the regular season. When we come back, we will look at the...
Kevin.
what's up? Oh,
I
knew you were going to cut me off. I forgot about this again. We forgot to talk about the other piece of news because we thought, I got to admit, Tuesday afternoon when this came out, I thought Flyers Twitter was going to just be gone forever. I thought this was going to be the final straw. The team announced new alternate captains. Obviously, going into last season, Mark Streit was one of the alternates until the trade deadline. Once he was traded, they gave it to Pierre-Edouard Bellemare. Bellemare got picked up in the expansion draft by Vegas, so there was an opening again. And the Flyers decided to split the duties this time among 2 players. One's going to wear it at home, one's going to wear it on the road. And the 2 players they picked, Valtteri Filppula is going to wear it at home, which isn't overly shocking. He's one of the most veteran players from NHL experience, at least. This is only the start of his first full season with the Flyers, but he's a veteran player and was certainly a candidate. But for the road games, the other alternate captain was Andrew McDonald. And knowing how Flyers fans feel about Andrew McDonald, I was prepared for everything to just blow up right there on the spot. Don't you guys agree?
Yeah, it's as soon because I saw that news just after the team kicked it out, and hopefully the social media manager who sent that out is I just hope that they pushed the tweet button and then immediately headed out the office and headed back home because they were in for a firestorm of epic proportions. The replies to that tweet were exactly as I expected them to be. It's Flyers Twitter just basically imploding onto itself like a dying sun. But I, for one, welcome our new Andrew McDonald overlords.
Oh my goodness! Press send and log off and walk away from the computer. Yep. Go ahead, Dan.
It's so stupid too because as you mentioned, the players voted for this. The players respect Valtteri Filppula and Andrew McDonald enough
They're the oldest non-goalies on the roster.
Yeah,
right?
exactly.
Yeah. So if they want them to represent the leadership of the team, then there's no problem with that. Valtteri Filppula won a Stanley Cup with Detroit. He's been back to the Stanley Cup final with Tampa Bay. He has the experience. He's one of the few players on this team with the experience. And Andrew McDonald is the most veteran player on the defensive side of the puck. Flyers fans don't like him, but you can't deny a fact that he's got the most experience out of anyone there. So if they respect him, then you should respect that and not go after some intern who has to tweet this stuff out.
I was even going to say he probably has that you said the key word. He probably has the most respect of any defenseman in that locker room because the players do really respect those 2 guys a lot. That's the thing. It's a player vote. This is what they chose.
Provorov and Gostisbehere have nothing but respect for the guy.
Right.
And they're the ones that are constantly being said that your game is being dragged down by this guy.
Yeah.
So
exactly. Well, and so we were going to take a break before that. We did have to get that in as part of the lineup and roster announcements and all that stuff. There was a lot of stuff that came out on Tuesday leading up to Wednesday's season opener, so obviously we had to touch on a lot. So now we will turn our attention to the regular season. When we come back, we look at the Flyers and the rest of the Metropolitan Division after the preseason, so stay with us here on the Flyerdelphia Podcast. You're listening to the Flyerdelphia Podcast with Kevin, Rob, and Dan on SportsTalkPhilly.com. And back here on the Flyerdelphia Podcast, and for the past few seasons, the Metropolitan Division has been arguably the most competitive and toughest division in the NHL. So with the Flyers making several internal moves to improve, how do they stack up against the likes of the Penguins, Blue Jackets, Capitals, and the rest of the Metropolitan Division? So that's the big question here. How is this team, as constructed, stack up against the rest of the division? Dan, why don't you start us off?
Well, the way I broke this down is, and I don't refer to this division as the Metropolitan because I don't like that name, because every city is a metropolitan. Like if it's the Metropolitan Division, the Chicago and LA should be in it. So I call it the Patrick Division. I like going back to the traditional days when hockey was hockey and ties were included. So in the Patrick Division, I broke this up to the two sets of teams that one that's better than the Flyers, one group that's better than the Flyers, and the group that's potentially worse. And the group that's better is much larger. You have the Pittsburgh Penguins, Washington Capitals, Columbus Blue Jackets, New York Rangers, and Carolina Hurricanes. All teams that have solid goaltending for the most part. And then you have teams that have really good defensive cores like Carolina, like New York, like Columbus. Columbus, I think, is going to win that division because they seem solid all around. And you have Pittsburgh that has Crosby and Malkin. It's pretty much a no-brainer to me that those are five teams that are just clearly better than the Flyers right now. And so that doesn't put the Flyers in a good spot because the only other teams that could potentially be worse than them are the Devils and the Islanders. And the only thing that really pushes them and intrigues me about the Devils, though, is the Devils have better goaltending than the Flyers, but their defensive core is wretched. And then they seem pretty good down the middle with Pavel Zacha, Nico Hischier, Adam Henrique, and Brian Boyle down the middle. So that's a good recipe to actually be really competitive this year. And then the Islanders, you'll have no idea what they're going to do because John Tavares has a contract dispute. They have a dispute with their arena. So you don't know if those two things are going to linger over the team. So for the Flyers, it doesn't really look too good in my eyes.
Rob, what about you?
Yeah, it's obviously. I remember a few years ago when the Metro Division was considered among the worst in the NHL, and it's kind of funny how things change. That's something that's turned around pretty quickly. But there's a lot to consider. Obviously, Pittsburgh's got the target on their back. They want that three-peat. But as far as I'm concerned, if the Stanley Cup presentation next year has a little bit less Pittsburgh, I'll be all right with that. But you have Columbus, who had an incredible year last year under John Tortorella. But the thing about Tortorella is he's one of those coaches that wears on you pretty quickly. So it's something where, if we have the new look, the newly reformed torch that was being touted a few years ago, if that's something that could that could continue and Columbus still wants to play for him, there's still something that can't be discounted. Obviously, with Sergei Bobrovsky in goal, who has really come into his own as kind of the class of the league, and all the young talent that they have up front, and it's something where they're going to be a tough out for sure. And the Islanders, I've mentioned this before, they're kind of in that WTF is going on here category because they with their arena situation with the Tavares contract. But the one thing that they did pretty well last year was when they brought Doug Wade in the second half of the season, they really played well for him down the stretch. So I'm curious to see how they can do with a full season of Doug Wade. And obviously you have Carolina that's in one of those positions, almost not unlike the Flyers, where they have a lot of younger talent, especially on the back end. Guys like you have names like Elias Lindholm with Carolina. You have Jacob Slavin. You have Noah Hannafin. You have these younger guys that are looking to make an impact, and honestly could, if they're ready to take that next step, they're going to be a tough out. So the Rangers, who they're poised. They're always the team that makes the noise, but they're never actually able to gain any really substantial progress, say, for 2014. But, obviously there's that Kevin Shattenkirk addition, so he provides an immediate bolstering on their blue line. So it's something where there's a lot of competition going on in the Metro Division, and the Flyers, I think, their best case scenario, I don't see them getting in that top three, but that's something where, they definitely, I think their best case scenario is middle of the pack. Maybe they can get a wild card. I don't know. I think that their youth is not going to be able to make that push, but we'll definitely see how they can do.
Yeah, I mean, look, in short, they're probably no better than they were last year on paper. I mean, the team made improvements, but the division just keeps getting stronger. So when you stack the Flyers up against anybody else in the division on paper, even the improvements they made don't vault them any higher over some of the other teams just because they're in different positions, they're in different mindsets right now. The Penguins are the unquestioned favorite to me, not only for the division, but for the Eastern Conference because of where they are and have been for the last 2 years. You still have Columbus and Washington, who, in my mind, both have the one thing that can get you really far in the regular season, which is insanely good goaltending. Sergei Bobrovsky, Braden Holtby, that will win you a lot of games in and of itself. The Rangers are going to be a little bit of an interesting team because Henrik Lundqvist is clearly on the back nine of his career at this point, so you're getting down to it. They're a team that could go either way. I still expect them to be a playoff team, but I don't expect them to be much more than that. The Islanders, we even said, are a complete mystery. Carolina's trending the right way. Even New Jersey is trending the right way with all the prospects they have. So, look, the thing is you play all the teams within your division enough times that you can control your own destiny. So if the Flyers want to be one of those teams, they want to talk like a playoff team and consider themselves a playoff team, then the answer here is simple. You have to be a more consistent team, and you have to tackle the task and the challenge in front of you on a nightly basis. It's simple as that. But obviously, will they do that with a very young team, I should say, and the lack of consistency that the veterans have shown in the past? I don't think so, but we'll see. I mean, that's the whole point of playing the games, is you have to play them out and wait and see, and staying healthy is a big part of it too. It's an 82 game, it's a marathon, not a sprint here, so you want a good start, but you got to finish too, and you got to find your way in there. But obviously, at most, only 5 teams out of this division will be in the playoffs, at most. Usually it's 4, so it could go a lot of different ways. I mean, and we kind of, Rob touched on it a little bit. I'll throw my 2 cents in here for this, and Dan will get yours as well. Does this team have, anything for the top 3? Probably not. We've kind of established who the top 3 of this division is. It's Pittsburgh, Columbus, and Washington, and it's really not going to change for right now. The Flyers are a team on the rise. There's no question about it, but it's way too early to even think like that, let alone pitch the question, I think. Dan, what do you think of that?
Yeah, they're not. There's no way I can see that happening unless what I expect to happen with John Tortorella and the Columbus Blue Jackets, like in 2 years, happens this season. Which is John Tortorella he's one of those coaches with a shelf life, and once that shelf life expires, things go bad. He had that shelf life pretty quickly in Vancouver, but that seems to be more of an exception rather than a rule. And usually with John Tortorella coached teams, he takes that team higher and higher until they're competing for a President's Trophy and they look like legit cup contenders. And that's what I think he's going to do with Columbus this season. Pittsburgh, their defense took a hit in free agency. They lost Nick Bonino, but the Flyers didn't catch up in terms of the difference between talent in that gap. Like the Flyers maybe inched a little bit closer, but not enough in which they can push Pittsburgh out of a playoff position. Pittsburgh still has Matt Murray. They still have Crosby. They still have Malkin. They're not going anywhere. And then you have the Washington Capitals, which I think tales of their demise are a wee bit exaggerated. They're still going to be really good. They lost Nate Schmidt. That's a hit. They lost, and they took a hit on defense, but it's not going to cost them a playoff spot. It's not going to cost them a top 3 spot, even in a division that has the New York Rangers, which should still be a really good team, and the Carolina Hurricanes, as we've all said, is a team that's trending up and should make a playoff push this season.
Yeah, and we'll keep it here. We're not going to break between this and our next segment because we'll just kind of carry over and keep talking about the Flyers and we want to talk about some of their strengths and weaknesses entering the season. We also want to look at the first 3 games they have. We've already mentioned several times already. Season starts Wednesday night with San Jose. game against the Sharks. They play the Kings on Thursday. They play the Ducks on Saturday. You get to play, and that's only the beginning of a big-time Western Conference swing that the Flyers will be on, because it's only going to continue even once they return home. Into the following week, they have the Nashville Predators on the road still. Yes, they'll play Washington in the home opener, but they eventually, in the next short little bit of time, after playing Washington at home and it's Florida at home in their second home game, they get Nashville again and Edmonton. And you're really quickly looking at quite a few games against the Western Conference to start off your season. That's a tough way to start off the season. So let's I think we want to kind of just go in and look at everything now, kind of bring it all back around and talk about some of the keys to the season, the strengths and weaknesses of this team. What do you guys see as strengths of the team? Dan, we'll start with you.
Well, I think we alluded to this on the last podcast that we did, that the Flyers finally have a solid set of four lines. Looks like a group of forwards that all four lines could actually put the puck in the net. I like that. I'm just concerned of where that will go in terms of, defensive help and back checking and all that. But in terms of his strength, you like the idea that all four lines could potentially produce some offense. And then the defensive core seems to be filling out when you have Robert Hagg making the team, and we're all going to assume that it's Sam Morin that's going in. You have guys that can clear the porch, move the puck up ice. It doesn't seem like it's going to be very long until Travis Sanheim comes up. So you're going to have a defensive core that's going to be inexperienced, but looks like it's going to finally, lose some of that dead weight and round out into a formidable defensive core. And in terms of the weaknesses, goaltending. Goaltending has always been the weakness in Philadelphia, and it's going to remain that way until, Brian Elliott did not have a strong last preseason game against the New York Islanders. He had at least 2 goals that he should have had. 5-on-5 offense is, of course, a weakness for this team until they prove otherwise. This team was absolutely wretched trying to score goals, 5-on-5 hockey. I think Jake Voracek had the most points, and it was like 100th or so, maybe not 100th, but it wasn't great. And then, I'm going to kind of contradict one of my strengths by saying that the youth on the blue line mixed with below average vets kind of make the defensive mystery. I'm going to have to wait and see how that goes until I call it a full-fledged weakness, but it is something of a question mark. And, maybe some of these vets will actually play above their head. You never know how Brandon Manning or Andrew McDonald are actually going to play until they actually play. And so in terms of strengths and weaknesses, that's what I'm going to go with.
Rob, what are your strengths and weaknesses?
Obviously, I'm a big fan of the first 2 scoring lines, and I think that the fourth line itself is something. There's a lot more skill on the fourth line, and that's been the trend for quite some time now. And that's something where the Flyers have that figured out. So I definitely like at least 3 of the lines, and then the third line is something that it's not. I don't hate it, but it's something I think could be pretty decent in its own right. Obviously, if you have Travis Konechny on that third line, there's a lot of potential for surprise from that, and I definitely like where he can go in his second year. So that's something where I definitely. Goaltending, obviously, as Dan addressed, I mean, what you're going to get out of Brian Elliott and Michael Neuvirth. It's not going to be anything really special. They're about as stopgap as a stopgap can get. And, I think when it comes down to it, when you have that back end with so many young guys on it, there's a lot of room for growth. You're going to have some growing pains along the way. It's one of those things that's going to happen. But I think that the back end, all these young defensemen could be a pretty good strength for the Flyers coming down. So I definitely like what I'm seeing out of the top 2 scoring lines, and especially in the defense. Some of the younger guys, I definitely can see a lot of room for impression there, and being impressed from those guys and just seeing what they have to offer.
Yeah, for me, I'm going to go kind of off of what you guys said. More depth among forwards is definitely a strength. They finally have what you can consider, 4 solid lines for sure. I mean, it just depends on how production's going to go. I don't expect great things from the third line. It didn't do much to impress me. I say that because of the fact that I look at that and I consider it a solid line because I was very impressed by the way Travis Konechny played throughout the preseason. The other two players in that line, Filppula and Weiss, don't do much for me. I think there will be some shuffling that goes on as the early part of the season progresses, but I do really like the way the fourth line looks, especially when you consider what the Flyers have had to deal with in years past for fourth lines. That's a good-looking fourth line. The top two lines obviously have potential as well. For me, another thing about it is, it's not great depth, but it's improved from last season. I think that's an important thing, taking steps in the right direction. I also look at the power play as a big strength still. The first power play unit took a hit with Braden Schen's departure, and they'll have to try to find a way to make up for that, whether it's with Valtteri Filppula or whether it's if Dale Weiss goes back into that position or if somebody from the second power play unit translates over to the first. That's debatable, and it'll develop as the season starts to go along. But watching the second power play, which in Sunday's game, Sean Couturier, Travis Konechny, Jordan Wheel, Nolan Patrick, and defensively it was Ivan Provorov. Those guys, as a collective group, were just a thrill to watch. And that's the thing. It's going to be better. The second power play unit is going to be better, and it doesn't mean that a power play for the Flyers feels like it's over after a minute. It's finally going to have some balance. It's not going to all be on the first power play unit. So that's definitely a strength, and the youth of this team as well is going to be, I think, a strength, because to me, the Nolan Patrick factor is a big deal, not just in the sense that he's on the team as himself and his own skill set, but what he can do to energize players around him, I think, is a big thing. The younger defenseman, same deal. You inject youth into a team, it can mean a lot of things, and it can do a lot of things for veteran players. Hopefully that's the case with the Flyers. Weaknesses, I agree with you guys. The goaltending situation is certainly far from ideal, and it's either going to be the thing that carries the Flyers to the brink of a playoff appearance if it's really good one way, or it's going to be the reason, once again, that they weren't consistent enough to make the playoffs. And yeah, the way Brian Elliott played, the thing is, the way Brian Elliott played when he made his preseason debut against Boston the previous week, excellent all the way through. And then the game on Sunday, he needed to have the first one, he needed to have the third one, and you can't be doing that when it counts. So it's a big thing. We'll have to wait and see. There's really no telling what the Flyers are going to get from Michael Neuvert. He only really played one full preseason game, or close to one full preseason game. He never got the full game in that he was supposed to, which would have been the Boston game. Alex Lyon had to come from the Lehigh Valley Phantoms just to start and play the duration of that game. The other weakness I have on here, or a couple others I should say, penalty killing is still a weakness to me, only because I really just don't know who you would consider penalty kill personnel at this point. Yes, Sean Couturier is a specialist in that department, and you've got a couple of other players that can slide in, but I just don't know who's going to be those guys yet, and if they're going to be able to do it with any consistency. It's a big thing, and as good as the Flyers' power play was at times last year, the penalty killing needs to improve, and I don't know that it's going to this season at least, unless there's a lot of contributions from younger players who you're going to give significant time in that department as well. And then the other weakness, which is more of a question really at this point, is will veterans drag this team down in any way? And you're talking Filppula, Weiss, Jori Lehtera, who's probably going to be a healthy scratch in the season opener, and if Matt Reed comes back up shortly, Matt Reed we're talking about. It's those guys. It's also the guys at the top, maybe in a little bit of a lesser sense, but it is guys like Claude Giroux and Jake Voracek and Wayne Simmons. I don't think Simmons is really going to be a guy who you can consider dragging the team down, because he really gives it his all every night and scores pretty much a big chunk of the team's goals. But it's everybody else. These guys need to drive five. It kind of goes into what Dan said about the 5-on-5 play. These guys need to drive the play, and if they don't, it's going to be a long year. It's going to be tough to watch sometimes, and you're expecting good things with the amount of rookies that are on the team, but you want to see the veterans start to show themselves and what they were in years past to get to this point. That's kind of my thinking on that. So with that, we're going to take a short break. We'll come right back and wrap up the show with a few predictions for this season. So stick around. We'll be right back on the Flyerdelphia Podcast.
You're listening to the Flyerdelphia Podcast with Kevin, Rob, and Dan on SportsTalkPhilly.com.
Back here on the Flyerdelphia Podcast, and with the start of the new season, it's time for us to foolishly make predictions that will almost certainly be wrong. Pretty much. I mean, we started to do that with the rosters a couple weeks ago. We have players on there that aren't. We had players in our lineups that aren't going to be playing tomorrow night, or on Wednesday night, I should say. So, things like that. But we'll take our chances with this. We'll take a couple shots and see if we hit on any of these. But one of the things we do have on the site for Wednesday morning is the entire Flyerdelphia staff making predictions on the season ahead. Some Flyers-based and others that are on the NHL as a whole. So Rob, Dan, and I are going to deliver a few of ours right now. We kind of touched on this when we were talking about the Metropolitan Division, but we'll do it for everything here. So where do the Flyers finish in the standings? This is league-wide, conference, and division. Dan, we'll start with you.
Well, I'm not going to be a favorite of Flyers fans when I say that in the what I call the Patrick division, I have the Flyers finishing 7th. It's still a little touch and go with me who I think will be above them in terms of the Islanders or Devils. I'm intrigued by the Devils. I think they might actually be better than what I'm giving them credit for right this second when I have them 8th. And I think the Islanders could potentially be a train wreck this season. But they have John Tavares. They just got Jordan Eberle. They have some talent there, so I'll have them at 6 for now. Earmarked with the right to reverse that at any time before the season starts. In the Eastern Conference itself, I have them 14th. Again, in between the Islanders and the Devils, I think Buffalo is going to improve with Phil Housley as their head coach. Ottawa is not going to make the playoffs in my eyes, but I still feel that they're going to be in the hunt. And I have Detroit being the worst team in the Eastern Conference. Not that hard to really understand why that's not a great team they have. They got to wait out some contracts and such. And then in terms of the league, again, in between the Islanders and Devils, but I have them at 26. So they have a really good chance of getting a top 5 pick in my eyes.
Okay, Rob, what's your answer to that one?
I think it's something where we could easily see the Flyers, I think, finishing 6th in the division. Obviously, anywhere in that bottom half, just because of how volatile the rest of the division is and how stacked it is. I mean, that's something that could see the Flyers go anywhere. But I also do feel as though the Flyers could be better than a good number of the other teams in the Eastern Conference as well, especially in the Atlantic. You know, they're going to be a lot better than Detroit. I think Florida, you could see them taking a bit of a step back. I think that you're not going to get a whole lot out of Boston and possibly even Tampa Bay again this year. So that's something where I think that the Flyers, I think, could finish at least perhaps 11th in the conference, and that's an optimistic look at best. I think really anywhere in that 11, 12, 13 range, I think, is something that could be realistic. And if they finish as low as 14th, I mean, that's something that wouldn't even surprise me as well. And league-wide, I mean, that's something where, you know, maybe I'd say anywhere in that 5th to 8th place range. I mean, we'll see how that one goes. It's obviously there's a lot factoring into that as well. So that's something where the Flyers, I mean, it's something where they'll be decent, but they won't really be anything great unless they surprise people. So we'll kind of see how that one goes.
Yeah, I'm kind of more on Rob's side with my answers as well. I have them 6th in the Metropolitan Division. They could come out anywhere between 4th, 5th, 6th, 7th, you know, you name it. There's a lot of places where the Flyers could slot in, but it just depends on how consistent they are. Consistency has not been the name of the game for this team for several years. So I'm going 6th, which seems to be a pretty kind of conservative answer. It's not the answer fans are looking for, but it's going to trend in the right direction. See, the thing is that I think the Flyers are going to be kind of a good 6th, if that's possible. It means they'll put up a decent number of points in the standings. I think they'll be on the higher end of the teams that missed the playoffs in the Eastern Conference, but I still don't have them making the playoffs because there's just too many powerhouses still left in their own division for one, and then some of the teams that are trending upward in the Eastern Conference that just don't make it possible. I also have the Flyers 11th in the East. I think that's a fair range. Just like I said, I think they'll be better than a lot of teams in the conference, but maybe not their division. I think their division is going to play tough. I can see them coming away with some extra points in conference games, though, that will keep them competitive down the stretch and kind of clinging to false hope, maybe. And then I'll go 22nd in the NHL overall. just because I think that's kind of been the way that it's been the last few years. You know, they were in position even last year in a year where they were not very consistent, not very good in a lot of areas. They still were actually in place to have the 13th overall pick in the draft before luck came their way. So it doesn't mean that they're anywhere close to being bottom feeders of this league. I think there could be a lot of improvement. It all comes down to how well the young players play and where everybody else and what they do in terms of consistency against their own division and the Eastern Conference. So our next 3 questions here, and these are the 3 that we'll give you kind of as a preview for what will be on the website. These are all questions that are all Flyers related. So who do you guys have as your scoring leader, the player with the most points on the Flyers at the end of the year? Dan, who's your pick?
I'm going to go with a slight improvement for Jake Voracek with 71 points. I'm not going to get my hopes up that this team is going to improve very much in terms of offense. Just with, it might improve more of a depth circumstance because I believe there will be quite a few number of double-digit goal scorers, but I don't see the top level players like Voracek, like Giroux, improving much over this season. I don't know if Dave Hackstall's system will lend itself to that. I think it's more of like a sit back and kind of play responsible defense type situation. So I don't know if that's going to help Voracek, Giroux, and all them out. But Voracek 71 points is my answer.
All right, Rob, what's your pick?
I'm actually going to go back to the predictions for a second, and I'm going to unload my second set. I'm going to channel my inner LeVar Ball here and say that the Flyers are going to finish first in everything. They are going to be better than the 1977 Montreal Canadiens. They are going to be winning that Stanley Cup in 16 straight playoff games. They're going to go 16-0 in the playoffs, and if you disagree with that, you are not a big baller. But going back to the leading scorer prediction, I think it is going to be especially contingent on how the left wing experiment works out, but I think Claude Giroux could see new life. He'll be the leading scorer, and I think he'll get back into the mid-60s at least. I'm going to go with 66 points for him.
All right. Interestingly enough, Rob and I are on the same page again here. I have Claude Giroux as the leading scorer on the team as well for this year. I went a little bit north of where Rob was leveling off at. I've got him at 68 points. I don't think that anybody on this team is going to blow you away in terms of point total. If you're looking for Claude Giroux to get back into the mid 70s and push, go between 70 and 80, then the Flyers better be a playoff team at that rate, because it better be, if Giroux's got that high of a point total, then Voracek and Simmons better be following close behind. It means a lot of good things should be happening. But I like I said, if we're leveling off with what we said about where they're going to finish in the division, I think that anything crazy north of 70 for anybody is pretty outrageous at this point. And even where Dan picked with Jake Voracek, that's probably about the maximum you could go. And Voracek could have a better year than others, and be a higher point guy. So I don't think anything with that is outrageous. But if you're going to sit there and think that Giroux's going to have some 75 to 80 point season, I think you're a little out there with that one. So I'll go 68 for Giroux. Now, while we're on the subject of points, let's talk about what an expectation should be for Nolan Patrick this season. How many points do you guys have Nolan Patrick finishing with in his rookie season? Rob, let's get yours first on this one.
I think you could see Nolan Patrick easily crack the 20-goal plateau. That may be a bit of a conservative estimate, but I think you'll definitely see him finding the back of the net. And, I think he can also set a few plays himself up on his own. So I think we can maybe go with 20 goals and perhaps, 30 more assists. So I think right around the 50-point mark is something where he can do. I'm actually going to up that up a little bit. I'm going to go with 53 points.
Okay. Dan, what's your pick for that?
I was thinking 50 points as well, but I decided to knock it down a few pegs. So I have Nolan Patrick, especially since he's on a line with Jordan Wheel and Wayne Simmons. I feel like he's going to dish a little bit more than try and score. So I'm going to go with 15 goals and 33 assists for 48 points. That's a solid rookie season, not anything to, write home about, nothing that'll win you the Calder, but a solid rookie season.
And I'm going to meet you guys right in the middle on that one then, because I actually did a piece on this on Tuesday where I went off of what the Hockey News projected in one of their previews, and they kind of had it right around the 52-point mark when they totaled it. And my expectation is, if as a rookie, if he can hit 15 goals and double that total for assists and get to 30, I think it's a successful year. I'm going to go a little north of that and meet you guys in the middle on your two choices. And I'm going to actually say 50 on the nose for that. I think the idea of him getting somewhere in the range of somewhere in between 15 and 20 goals and then somewhere between 30, 35 assists, I think is a fair total. I think so. And the assist total could be higher and it could be 15 goals, that kind of thing. So we'll see what it is, but I think that in between those two numbers on each side will bring you out to 50 somehow. So that's what I'll go with. And then lastly, this is the last question we'll do for predictions. Like we said, you can catch a whole bunch of predictions, both Flyers based and NHL predictions, including teams, playoff teams, a couple of the conference champions, Stanley Cup pick, award winners. We're going to do all of that in that piece that's on the site on Wednesday morning. So do look for that. The last one is obviously this is a question that kind of got thrown in there a little late, but we want to ask it just to see how close one of us can get on the staff, but even more so the three of us among us. So with Oscar Lindblom not starting the year at the Flyers, he'll obviously, we assume, find a way to be called up some point during the year based on something, whether it's an injury comes into play, something like that. So what is the date that we should expect or that you would predict for Oscar Lindblom's call-up? Rob, I'll let you go first on this one again as well.
I'm going to say right before the Christmas break.
Okay, so you're talking mid to late December.
Yes.
Okay, Dan, what's yours?
I kind of looked at Jordan Wheel's time because I have this comparison with Wheel and Oscar Lindblom, and I was thinking it might be that Vegas game, that February 11th, but then I figured, it's going to be a little different this year. I think injuries might take a little toll a bit earlier, so I'm going to go with January 18th. I believe they're going to play Tampa Bay that night, excuse me. So I'm going to go with, right after Rob's prediction, I suppose.
Okay.
So to give a more exact answer, their last game before the Christmas break is December the 23rd. That's a road game in Columbus. That's the second of a back-to-back against Buffalo. So I'm actually going to go with that Tuesday and go with December the 19th.
Okay. Just ahead of the game on the 20th against Detroit then. And he would debut at home.
Yes.
I'm thinking the same kind of thing, sort of, at least in Rob's mind, with it'll be a home game. It'll be something where they can make the call quicker.
That's a 5-game homestand, too.
Yeah, exactly, and that's a good timing for it. I have something a little different. I was originally eyeing up something pretty early, kind of, and I pushed it back a little bit. I'm going to say it's going to be December 2nd that we'll see Lindblom make his NHL debut. That's a home game on a Saturday against Boston, shortly after the Thanksgiving point. The Black Friday game is the week before, so that's kind of my target. It's about 2 months in the minors. I just see something happening that forces them to make a move, and that's going to probably be your first guy, I would think. So that's why I'm going with it. There's really not much more to be said than that. I think we'll see him sooner rather than later. And that's pretty much, I think we've covered just about everything we could get our hands on in this episode. If nothing else, it's time for Flyers hockey. Certainly, to all of our listeners out there, enjoy the game on Wednesday night. It's a clean slate. We've obviously talked about a lot of possibilities. Still trying to be realistic about the Flyers' expectations and possibilities for the season, but it's a clean slate. Get excited. It's a new season, and we're looking forward to bringing you good Flyers talk throughout the year on the podcast, good content on the website, so definitely be checking it out throughout the season. So that's going to do it for us on the Flyerdelphia Podcast. We do want to thank everyone for listening. Be sure to subscribe to the podcast on iTunes and Google Play, and subscribe to our YouTube channel. For our next show coming up, we will do a show on Monday night. Going to give you the time, 8 o'clock on Monday night this time around at least. We'll do a live show. It's going to be the first live show. We're going to start doing the shows live weekly during the season, just to try to fit that in between games as best as possible, so you can hear us talk about the games. And that way we can kind of pick times when there's a break in the gameplay for a little while, and the Flyers are usually, Sunday seems to be a typical day when they're off, so we'll kind of do it like that. But usually Sunday, Monday kind of thing. But we'll start on Monday night. That'll be the 9th of October, 8 o'clock. We'll be doing the podcast live. We'll take a look back at the first 3 games of the season from this week. We'll start looking ahead to next week, a couple of games leading up to, or one game and on the road and then the home opener. And that's pretty much where we'll take that show. So once again, thank you for listening. For Rob Riches and Dan Heaning, I'm Kevin Durso, and this has been the Flyerdelphia Podcast on SportsTalkPhilly.com.
This has been another edition of the Flyerdelphia Podcast with Kevin Durso, Rob Riches, and Dan Heaning, presented by SportsTalkPhilly.com.